Lonely Cowboys Lost Dog returns leading Apache widow. Wild West heroic rescue. The sun rose slowly over the wide open plains of Arizona, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The land stretched endlessly, dotted with dry bushes, twisted cacti, and rocky hills that seemed to touch the clouds. In the midst of this vast wilderness lived a man named Jake Dalton, a cowboy known to everyone in the nearby town as quiet, strong, and mysterious. Jake wasn't the type of man to seek company or chatter by the fire. For years, he had lived alone, tending his small ranch and his herd of cattle, far from towns, roads, and people. The only company he truly enjoyed was his loyal dog, Ranger, a sharp-eyed border collie with a coat as black as midnight and energy that never seemed to fade. Jake had not always been alone. Once, his life had been filled with the warmth of family, laughter, and hope. But that was a long time ago. His wife had passed, leaving a silence in the house and a quiet ache in Jake's heart. Since then, the ranch had become his refuge and his prison at the same time. Every morning, he rose with the sun, saddled his horse, and rode through the desert to check on the cattle or mend fences. Every night he sat by the small fireplace, listening to the wind whistle through the hills, with Ranger curled up by his feet. It was a simple life, harsh yet peaceful, but the loneliness pressed against him like the dry desert heat. Ranger was more than a dog. He was a friend, a partner, and a reminder of the loyalty Jake still believed in. The collie followed him everywhere, herding cattle with precision and keeping an eye on the surroundings with unwavering vigilance. Sometimes Jake would talk to Ranger as if he were a person, sharing his thoughts and stories from the past. Ranger would tilt his head or let out a low bark, as if replying, and Jake would smile. In the wide loneliness of the desert, that small companionship made life bearable. One early morning, Jake woke to the sound of silence. Usually, Ranger would be at the foot of his bed, his tail thumping softly against the floor. But this time, there was nothing. The bed felt colder, emptier. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He called out, "Ranger, where are you, boy?" His voice echoed through the wooden walls of the ranch, but there was no response. Only the wind answered him, whistling through the broken fence boards and rattling the old shutters. A cold sense of fear crept into Jake's chest. Ranger never wandered far. He had a strong sense of home, of where he belonged, and he always returned quickly after exploring the surrounding land. But today, he was gone. Without thinking twice, Jake grabbed his hat, pulled on his boots, and stepped outside. The desert was already warming under the rising sun, but Jake's mind was focused entirely on his dog. He scanned the horizon, calling Ranger's name. "Ranger! Come on, boy! Where are you?" His voice grew hoarse from shouting, but still there was no sign of his faithful companion. Jake saddled his horse, Dusty, and began to ride across the plains, following the tracks that Ranger might have left. He rode past dry creeks, twisted rock formations, and sagebrush that scratched at his legs as he pushed through. The sun climbed higher, and the desert grew hotter, but Jake's worry drove him onward. He checked every bush, listened for any bark or rustle, but Ranger was nowhere to be found. Hours passed, and as the sun reached its peak, Jake began to fear the worst. Coyotes roamed these lands, and the desert was full of dangers, snakes, cliffs, and hidden holes. Ranger was smart, but even the cleverest dog could get into trouble out here. By evening, Jake returned to his ranch, exhausted and worried. Dusty snorted as he stepped down from the saddle, sensing his master's distress. Jake searched the barn, the corral, and even the little cabin he had built near the river, but Ranger was gone. That night, Jake sat by the fire, staring into the flames, feeling a weight he hadn't felt in years. Loneliness pressed against him, and fear gnawed at his heart. He couldn't sleep. Every shadow outside, every creak in the wind made him tense. He imagined Ranger lost, hurt, or trapped somewhere far away. Over the next few days, Jake never stopped searching. He rode for miles, checking the canyons and hills, calling out Ranger's name. He asked passing travelers and cowboys in town if they had seen a black border collie roaming the desert. Some had seen him, but others hadn't, and the answers offered no comfort. Each day without Ranger felt heavier, as if a part of Jake's soul had wandered off into the wilderness and might never return. Despite the fear and loneliness, Jake refused to give up. He remembered the bond he shared with Ranger, the countless times the dog had saved him from danger, whether it was rounding up stray cattle, warning him of rattlesnakes, or alerting him to approaching strangers. That loyalty demanded action. Jake could not simply wait for fate to decide Ranger's fate. He spent hours tracking paw prints in the soft dirt, following scents carried by the wind, and using every skill he had learned as a cowboy in the untamed desert. One evening, as Jake sat on a rock overlooking the canyon, he spotted a black figure moving in the distance. His heart leapt. Could it be Ranger? He spurred Dusty forward, urging the horse to gallop. As he approached, he realized it wasn't just Ranger. There was a woman with him, walking carefully, holding her head high despite exhaustion. She wore traditional Apache clothing, simple but strong, her long black hair tied neatly, and her eyes alert, scanning the surroundings with skill. Jake slowed as he got closer, unsure of what to make of this strange arrival. Ranger ran ahead, barking happily as he returned to his master. Relief and joy filled Jake's chest like a flood of sunlight after days of storm. He dropped from Dusty's back and embraced his loyal dog. Ranger wagged his tail furiously, jumping and licking Jake's face as if telling him that everything would be okay. Then Jake's attention turned to the woman. She approached cautiously, her eyes wary but not hostile. She introduced herself as Lila, a widow from the Apache tribe. Her husband had been killed months ago during a violent encounter with outlaws who sought to claim her family's land. She had been traveling alone, trying to escape the same dangers that now haunted the region. Ranger had found her, guiding her safely to Jake's ranch. At first, Jake didn't know how to react. He had lived alone for so long that the sudden presence of another person felt strange and unfamiliar. But he saw the exhaustion in Lila's eyes, the quiet determination in her stance, and the relief she felt in finding safety. Something inside him stirred, a mixture of empathy, curiosity, and the instinct to help. He offered her food, water, and shelter, and she accepted, too weary to refuse. That night, Jake and Lila sat by the fire while Ranger lay close to them, his head resting on Jake's boots. The desert stretched endlessly outside, filled with dangers and mysteries, but inside the cabin there was a rare sense of warmth and trust. Lila shared stories of her life, her lost husband, and the hardship she had faced, while Jake listened, sharing only what felt natural, without forcing words. Though strangers at first, a quiet understanding began to grow between them, united by survival, respect, and the shared bond of loss. As the stars twinkled above the desert sky, Jake realized that this encounter might change his life forever. The arrival of Lila, guided by his loyal dog, had broken the walls of his solitude. For the first time in years, he felt hope, not just for Ranger, but for the possibility of friendship, courage, and purpose beyond the ranch. Little did he know, the days ahead would test his skills, bravery, and heart like never before, in ways that would reveal the true meaning of loyalty, heroism, and connection in the harsh, untamed Wild West. The morning after Ranger returned with Lila, Jake woke before the sun. The desert air was cool, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and dust. He looked around the cabin, seeing Ranger curled up near the fireplace and Lila sitting quietly on a wooden stool, her eyes focused on the distant hills. She seemed small in the vast emptiness of the desert, yet there was a quiet strength in her posture, a calm determination that told Jake she had faced more challenges than most men could imagine. Jake approached slowly, tipping his hat. "Morning," he said simply. Ranger lifted his head and wagged his tail, barking softly as if welcoming the new day. Lila offered a faint smile, acknowledging his greeting. She was polite, cautious, and respectful, but her eyes held a hint of sadness, a shadow of her past losses. Jake knew that look well. He had seen it in himself many times during his years of solitude. After breakfast, a simple meal of bread, beans, and coffee, Jake sat with Lila near the cabin door. The sun had risen higher now, warming the air and illuminating the rolling hills and jagged rocks surrounding the ranch. He wanted to understand why she was here and what had brought Ranger to find her. Lila spoke carefully, choosing her words with care. She explained that she had been traveling alone since the death of her husband. A gang of outlaws had attacked her small trading post months ago, taking everything they could, food, supplies, and even the few possessions she had left from her family. They had burned her husband's cabin and left her with nothing. Since then, she had been moving from one safe place to another, trying to escape their cruelty and survive in the desert. Ranger had found her near a narrow canyon where she had been resting after a long journey. The dog had sensed her presence from miles away, guided her to safety, and now waited patiently for Jake to understand the connection. Ranger's loyalty and bravery, Jake felt a swell of pride and relief. This dog had not only returned home, but had brought a stranger to him, someone in need. Jake listened carefully, asking questions about the outlaws and the dangers she had faced. Lila spoke of them with quiet courage, describing how they had threatened other settlers in the area, taking advantage of the isolation of the desert. She explained that they were well-armed and ruthless, preying on anyone who resisted. Her voice was steady, but Jake could sense the fear beneath her calm words. She had survived this long through cunning, courage, and knowledge of the land. After listening, Jake finally spoke. "You're lucky Ranger found you," he said. "The desert isn't kind to those who travel alone. And lucky for you, I know this land better than anyone. If they try to hurt you again, I'll make sure they regret it." Lila looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. She had been alone for so long that the presence of someone willing to help felt both strange and comforting. Over the next few days, Jake and Lila worked together to repair the small cabin and secure the ranch. Jake showed her how to gather firewood, maintain the fences, and care for the cattle. Lila, in turn, shared her knowledge of the land, where water could be found during dry spells, which plants were safe to eat, and how to read the signs of animals and people moving through the desert. Ranger remained their constant companion, alert and protective, his sharp eyes watching the horizon for any sign of danger. During this time, Jake began to notice something remarkable. Lila was not only brave, but clever and resourceful. She had survived on her own for months in a harsh environment that would have defeated most men. She could move silently through the desert, find food and water where it seemed impossible, and even set simple traps to warn of approaching strangers. Jake admired her, though he did not say so aloud. There was a quiet respect growing between them, built on shared survival and mutual understanding. One afternoon, as the sun blazed high above, Jake decided to scout the surrounding area to see if any signs of the outlaws appeared nearby. He took Ranger with him, leaving Lila behind to rest and organize supplies. The dog ran ahead, ears perked, sniffing the dry earth for clues. Jake followed, moving carefully through the rocky hills and narrow canyons, his eyes scanning for footprints, broken branches, or any disturbance in the sand that could indicate human presence. Hours passed without a sign of danger, but the tension in the air was unmistakable. The desert was beautiful, yet unforgiving, and Jake knew that at any moment the outlaws could strike. He thought about Lila, about how much courage it must take to survive alone in such a place. He felt a new sense of responsibility, not just for the ranch or the land, but for her safety. Ranger returned periodically, barking or nudging Jake to keep moving, guiding him with instincts sharper than any map or compass. When they returned to the cabin at sunset, Lila greeted them with relief, gathering water from a nearby spring and tending to the small garden of vegetables she had planted. Seeing her safe and unharmed brought a rare smile to Jake's face. They sat together outside, watching the sky turn shades of pink and purple, the desert stretching endlessly before them. For a moment, there was peace, an unspoken understanding that they were no longer alone in facing the hardships of the Wild West. But that peace was fragile. Over the following days, subtle signs of the outlaws' presence began to appear. Broken branches, distant campfires, and tracks that did not belong to any known traveler hinted that danger was drawing near. Jake noticed Lila watching the horizon with a sharp intensity, her senses alert for anything out of the ordinary. She had faced threats before, but now she was not alone. Jake and Ranger were with her, ready to stand against whatever came. Jake realized that helping Lila meant more than offering shelter or supplies. It meant preparing for a confrontation that could test their courage, skill, and determination. He spent long hours teaching her how to defend herself, how to use a rifle safely, and how to move silently through the desert without leaving a trace. Lila learned quickly, her hands steady, her mind sharp, and her resolve strong. Ranger remained at her side during training, a loyal companion in every step, as if knowing that the survival of his two humans depended on cooperation and trust. Despite the growing threat, Jake found moments of quiet joy. Watching Lila laugh quietly as Ranger performed clever tricks, sharing simple meals, or sitting by the fire as the stars emerged overhead, reminded him that life could still hold warmth and companionship, even in the harshest conditions. He began to realize that courage and loyalty were not only measured in battles, but also in the ability to trust and care for others, even when the world was unforgiving. One evening, as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Lila shared more of her story. She spoke of her husband, a gentleman who had protected his land and people with courage and honor. She spoke of the outlaws who had destroyed that life, taking away everything she loved. Her voice was calm, but Jake could hear the pain beneath her words. He realized that she carried not only grief but also determination, the kind of determination that could overcome fear and inspire bravery. Jake listened quietly, his heart heavy with empathy. He knew that together they could face the dangers ahead. Ranger, sensing the gravity of the moment, rested his head on Jake's knee, his eyes alert even in the darkness. The bond between man, dog, and woman was growing stronger, formed through trust, shared survival, and the understanding that the Wild West was a place where courage was essential and loyalty was priceless. As the night grew darker, a chill settled over the desert. the wind whispered through the canyons, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke and dust, a reminder that danger was never far. Jake knew that the days ahead would test them in ways they could not yet imagine. But he also knew that with Ranger's loyalty and Lila's courage, they had a chance to face whatever came, to protect what mattered, and perhaps to find a new sense of purpose and connection in the vast, untamed land around them. And so, as the stars sparkled above the desert and the campfire crackled softly, the three of them, Cowboy, Dog, and Apache Widow, prepared for the journey ahead. Each of them had their own scars, their own pasts, but together they would face the trials of the Wild West, relying on bravery, intelligence, and loyalty to survive. Ranger's bark echoed softly in the night, a reminder that hope and courage could shine even in the loneliest places, and that sometimes the desert itself could bring people together in ways they never expected. The desert grew hotter as the days passed, and the wide-open plains, hills, and canyons seemed even lonelier under the blazing sun. Jake Dalton had grown used to the silence of the land, but now there was a tension in the air he could not ignore. Subtle signs showed that trouble was approaching. Broken twigs, faint footprints, and the occasional distant fire told him that the outlaws Lila had spoken of were not far away. He studied every detail with the precision of a man who had survived the harshest conditions the Wild West could offer. Ranger, alert as ever, patrolled the perimeter of the ranch with keen eyes and ears, ready to warn of any approaching danger. Jake called Lila to his side one morning as they examined the tracks near the riverbed. "These are fresh," he said quietly, pointing to the disturbed earth and the prints left behind by heavy boots. "They've been through here recently. They're moving closer to us." Lila knelt down, tracing the footprints with her fingers. "Yes," she said. "I've seen signs like these before. They're organized, careful. They're watching and waiting for the right moment." Her voice was steady, but her eyes showed concern. Jake nodded. He respected her knowledge of the land and the ways of survival, and he trusted her instincts completely. Over the next several days, Jake and Lila worked tirelessly to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. They repaired fences, reinforced doors, and cleared paths around the cabin to give themselves better sightlines of the surrounding desert. Lila taught Jake how to use the natural terrain to their advantage, pointing out high ridges for observation, hidden valleys for retreat, and narrow passages where a small group could hold off many attackers. Ranger assisted in every way he could, sniffing out hidden dangers, alerting them to approaching animals, and even tracking potential signs of the outlaws. Despite the looming threat, the bond between Jake and Lila grew stronger. During their work, they shared stories of their pasts and lessons learned from hardship. Lila spoke of her husband, a kind and brave man who had protected his people and taught her the ways of the land. She explained the strategies she had learned for surviving in the desert, for evading danger, and for moving silently so that enemies could not follow. Jake in turn shared tales of cattle drives, long nights under the stars, and the harsh lessons the desert had taught him about patience, resilience, and respect for the land. One afternoon, while they were observing the distant hills for signs of movement, Ranger suddenly barked and ran toward a rocky ridge. Jake and Lila followed cautiously, their eyes scanning the surroundings. At the ridge, they discovered faint tracks leading away from the desert floor into a hidden canyon. "They're scouting," Jake said. "They're testing the land, looking for a way to approach without being seen. We need to be ready." Lila nodded, her expression determined. She began marking the area with subtle signs that only they could recognize, creating a system of warnings for when the outlaws returned. As the tension increased, Jake realized they needed more than just defensive measures. They needed a plan to outsmart the outlaws, to anticipate their moves and strike when the moment was right. He spent hours studying the terrain, considering possible ambush points, escape routes, and traps they could use to their advantage. Lila contributed ideas as well, suggesting simple but effective strategies drawn from her knowledge of the land and her experience with conflict. Ranger remained a constant presence, his intelligence and instincts guiding them in ways that often surprised Jake. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of gold and red, Jake and Lila sat on a ridge overlooking the ranch. The air was warm, but a quiet tension lingered. They knew the outlaws were nearby, watching, waiting for a chance to strike. "They won't give up easily," Jake said. "They'll try everything to get what they want." Lila's eyes reflected the fading light. "We'll stop them," she replied calmly. "We have to." Her courage strengthened Jake's resolve, reminding him that they were not just protecting a ranch, they were standing up for what was right, for justice in a land where law often struggled to reach. The following day, Jake and Lila tested their strategies. They moved silently through the desert, scouting for potential hiding spots and observing the patterns of wildlife that could indicate human presence. Ranger led the way, sniffing the air and alerting them to subtle signs that might have gone unnoticed. Together, they practiced communication through gestures and signals, ensuring that they could coordinate silently if a confrontation came. Every move was calculated, every step measured, and their confidence in each other grew with each passing hour. As the sun reached its peak, a sudden dust cloud appeared on the horizon. Jake squinted, raising his hand to shield his eyes. "They're coming," he said. The cloud grew larger, revealing the figures of men on horseback moving swiftly and purposefully across the plains. Lila's eyes narrowed, and she positioned herself behind a rock, ready to act. Ranger barked sharply, running ahead to investigate, then returned to Jake, confirming the presence of the outlaws. The danger they had anticipated was real, and it was closer than ever. Jake, Lila, and Ranger prepared for the confrontation with careful precision. Jake loaded his rifle, checking the sights and ensuring every cartridge was ready. Lila drew a smaller firearm she had brought for protection, her hands steady and confident. Ranger remained close, alert, and ready to assist. They moved to a vantage point that overlooked a narrow canyon, the perfect location to observe and, if necessary, defend themselves. The outlaws were skilled, but Jake knew the land better than anyone, and with Lila's guidance they had created an advantage that the attackers could not anticipate. Hours passed as the outlaws moved cautiously through the terrain. Jake and Lila observed their movements, noting their numbers, their behavior, and their patterns. It was clear that the gang had experience. They were organized, confident, and ruthless. But they were not prepared for the combined skills of Jake, Lila, and Ranger. The trio worked together seamlessly, communicating through gestures, signals, and the dog's intelligence. Each small victory, such as spotting an enemy scout or avoiding detection, strengthened their confidence and resolve. As night fell, Jake realized that the confrontation would not be simple. The outlaws could attack at any moment, and the desert offered little cover for the unprepared. He and Lila discussed a plan, considering every possibility: defensive positions, escape routes, and ways to draw the attackers into a trap. Ranger seemed to understand the seriousness of the situation, pacing near the edges of the ridge and barking occasionally to indicate distant movements. The trio's bond, forged through trust and shared survival, was now their greatest weapon. Throughout the night, they maintained vigilance. The desert was quiet, except for the occasional howl of a coyote or the rustle of the wind through the rocks. Jake thought about the responsibility he felt, not only for protecting Lila and Ranger, but for standing against the cruelty of the outlaws. In a lawless land, courage, intelligence, and loyalty were as powerful as any weapon, and he was determined to use every resource at his disposal. Lila's calm presence reminded him that bravery was not just physical, it was also mental and emotional. By dawn, the outlaws had retreated slightly, perhaps sensing that their prey was ready. Jake, Lila, and Ranger used this time to strengthen their position, setting up simple traps and preparing for the possibility of an attack. They knew the outlaws would return, and that when they did, the confrontation would test every skill, every ounce of courage, and every moment of trust they had built. Ranger remained alert, his eyes scanning the horizon, ready to lead or assist as needed. The morning light bathed the desert in gold, revealing the rugged beauty of the land. Jake looked at Lila and Ranger, feeling a quiet pride in what they had accomplished so far. They were not just surviving, they were preparing to face danger with courage, intelligence, and loyalty. The outlaws would soon learn that in this part of the Wild West, some people were not easy prey. Jake, Lila, and Ranger had become a team, united by necessity, respect, and the unbreakable bonds of trust. And so, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, the trio waited, ready to meet the challenge that was sure to come. The desert was vast, wild, and unforgiving, but together they had the skill, courage, and loyalty to face it and to protect what mattered most. The desert was silent that morning, but the calm was only a mask. Jake Dalton knew the outlaws would strike soon, and the tension in the air was thick enough to feel. Ranger stood at the edge of the ridge, ears pricked, nose twitching, sensing every movement in the desert. Lila crouched beside Jake, her eyes scanning the horizon, calm but alert. Both of them understood that the moment of confrontation had arrived. This was no longer preparation, it was action. The first sign of trouble was subtle, a faint rustle among the rocks far below the ridge. Jake squinted, noticing the glint of metal as sunlight reflected off the guns of approaching men. The outlaws were confident, moving quickly and quietly, trying to surprise whoever was on the ranch. But they had underestimated Jake, Lila, and Ranger. The trio had studied the terrain, prepared traps, and practiced every possible move. They knew the land better than the intruders, and the advantage was theirs. Jake signaled to Lila, pointing to a narrow pass between two rocky hills. "They'll come through there," he whispered. Ranger growled low, agreeing, and circled ahead, his movements precise and controlled. The dog's sharp eyes spotted every step the outlaws took, every movement, every stumble. Ranger's bark later would serve as a warning that the intruders had been spotted, giving Jake and Lila the crucial seconds they needed to act. As the first outlaw appeared in the narrow canyon, Jake raised his rifle and aimed carefully. He didn't panic. Years of surviving the harsh desert had taught him patience and precision. Lila followed his lead, ready with her own weapon, her stance steady and controlled. The outlaws had expected an easy target, a lone rancher or an unprotected woman. Instead, they found 3 defenders, a cowboy, a skilled Apache widow, and a loyal, intelligent dog. The first shots rang out, echoing across the canyon walls. Dust kicked up from the dry earth, and the outlaws ducked for cover, surprised by the accuracy and strategy of their defenders. Jake moved with calculated speed, shooting only when necessary and keeping low to avoid being seen. Lila maneuvered beside him, using rocks and shadows for cover, her aim true and steady. Ranger darted between them, barking, distracting, and even nudging intruders into vulnerable positions. The dog's intelligence was remarkable. He seemed to know exactly where the danger was and how to lead the attackers into traps that Jake and Lila had prepared. The outlaws were dangerous, but they were not prepared for the combined skill of the trio defending the ranch. Jake used the high ridges to his advantage, picking off targets while remaining largely unseen. Lila's knowledge of the terrain allowed her to move silently, taking positions that gave her clear shots without exposing herself. Ranger's loyalty and bravery were unmatched, and at times his quick movements and barks saved both Jake and Lila from being caught by surprise. At one point, a group of outlaws tried to flank them, sneaking along a hidden path to reach the cabin. Ranger noticed immediately, his bark sharp and commanding. Jake and Lila reacted instantly, moving to intercept the attackers. They forced the outlaws into a narrow canyon, where their numbers counted for nothing. The confined space meant that only a few could attack at a time, giving Jake and Lila the advantage. With careful aim and quick reflexes, they managed to drive the intruders back, forcing them to retreat under the pressure of their unexpected skill. Despite their efforts, one of the outlaws managed to slip past them, racing toward the cabin where Lila had hidden supplies and valuables. Jake realized immediately and shouted a warning. Lila, anticipating the move, positioned herself to block the path. Ranger ran ahead, barking fiercely, his eyes locked on the intruder. The outlaw hesitated, caught off guard by the coordinated defense, and in that moment, Lila acted. She pushed him back, forcing him off balance while Jake advanced from the ridge. The man stumbled, giving Jake the opportunity to disarm him. The outlaw fell to the ground, realizing he had underestimated the courage and skill of his opponents. The battle continued for hours. The desert sun climbed high, casting harsh shadows over the canyon and the rocky terrain. Sweat ran down Jake's face, Lila's arms ached, and Ranger's coat glistened in the sunlight, but none of them wavered. They had trained for this, prepared for this, and the bond between them had never been stronger. Every move was coordinated, every action deliberate. The outlaws began to realize that victory was slipping from their grasp. The man who had thought survival was easy in the desert now faced 3 defenders who would not back down. By late afternoon, the outlaws were scattered, some retreating into the desert, others captured or disarmed by Jake and Lila. The ranch was safe, for now. The trio took a moment to breathe, their bodies tired but spirits high. Ranger ran around the perimeter sniffing, ensuring that no intruder remained hidden. Jake and Lila shared a brief look, a silent acknowledgement of the courage and teamwork that had carried them through the battle. The day had tested them in every way, but they had emerged victorious, their bond strengthened by the shared danger. After the dust settled, Jake and Lila began assessing the damage. The ranch had suffered minor disruptions, but nothing permanent. The fences were intact, the cattle were safe, and the cabin remained standing. They worked together to repair what was needed, sharing tasks and supporting each other. Ranger remained close, his tail wagging proudly as if he understood that his actions had been heroic. The dog had not only protected his master and Lila, but had played a crucial role in the strategy and success of their defense. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple, Jake, Lila, and Ranger sat near the fire. The air was cooler now, carrying the soft scent of sage and desert flowers. The battle was over, but the lessons of the day lingered. Jake reflected on the courage of Lila, who had faced danger with skill and composure. He thought about Ranger, whose loyalty and intelligence had been indispensable, and he realized that he had grown too, not just as a cowboy, but as a man capable of trust, cooperation, and connection. Lila spoke quietly, breaking the silence. "We did it," she said, her voice calm, but filled with relief. "We protected what mattered. We survived." Jake nodded, a small smile on his face. "Yes," he replied. "Together we can face whatever comes next." Ranger barked softly, as if agreeing, and curled up near Jake's feet, tired but satisfied. The trio had faced danger, used courage and intelligence, and emerged stronger for it. As the night grew darker, the stars sparkled above the desert sky, endless and brilliant. The wind whispered through the canyons, carrying with it the quiet sounds of the wilderness. Jake looked at Lila and Ranger, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. The battle had tested their limits, but it had also shown them the power of trust, loyalty, and courage. They had learned that even in the harshest, most unforgiving land, heroes could rise, not through brute strength alone, but through careful planning, bravery, and the bonds formed between those who truly cared for each other. In the days that followed, Jake and Lila continued to reinforce the ranch and ensure that the outlaws would not return. Ranger remained ever vigilant, patrolling the land, listening for every sound, and guiding them with his sharp instincts. The desert was still vast and wild, but now it felt less lonely. The three of them, Cowboy, Apache widow, and loyal dog, had faced the wild together, survived, and grown stronger. Their victory was not just a defense of land. It was a testament to courage, loyalty, and the strength found in unity. Jake realized that the events of the past days had changed him forever. He no longer felt the crushing weight of loneliness that had filled his years of solitude. Lila's presence, combined with Ranger's loyalty and intelligence, had brought purpose and hope into his life. Together they had faced danger and had emerged victorious. And in the quiet moments of the evening, as the fire flickered and the desert whispered its ancient songs, Jake knew that their journey was far from over. They had survived, yes, but they had also discovered the true meaning of courage, friendship, and resilience in a land that demanded all three. And so, as the stars shone brightly above, Jake, Lila, and Ranger sat together, united by their experiences, ready for whatever challenges the Wild West might throw at them next. The battle had been won, but the adventure and the bond between them was only beginning. The desert air was calm the morning after the battle. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting a soft golden light across the ranch and the surrounding hills. Jake Dalton stood outside his cabin, leaning on the fence, watching Ranger patrol the perimeter. The dog moved confidently, sniffing the ground, ears pricked, alert to every sound. Jake felt a deep sense of relief wash over him. The outlaws were gone, scattered or captured, and for the first time in months, the land felt safe. Yet there was more than just safety. There was hope, a quiet feeling that life could once again be full of meaning. Lila appeared at the cabin door, carrying a basket of fresh water and a few vegetables she had gathered from a small garden she had planted. Her face was calm, but her eyes shone with determination and strength. She had survived the desert, the outlaws, and the dangers of isolation. Now, she stood as a symbol of courage, hope, and resilience. Ranger barked happily at her, running to greet her and nudging the basket with his nose, as if inviting her to share a small joke. Jake smiled at the sight, feeling that sense of family he had long thought lost. The days following the battle were filled with work, reflection, and careful preparation. Jake and Lila worked together to repair fences, rebuild small structures damaged by the skirmish, and make the ranch even more secure. They knew that life in the Wild West was never completely safe, but they also knew that courage, careful planning, and loyalty. Ranger remained their vigilant companion, patrolling the land, alert to every sound, every movement. His loyalty and bravery had been indispensable in the recent battle, and Jake could not imagine facing the harsh desert without him. While they worked, Jake and Lila grew closer. Their conversations, once cautious and formal, became comfortable and easy. They shared small jokes, stories from their pasts, and thoughts about the future. Lila spoke of her late husband, honoring his memory with quiet reverence. She spoke of the lessons she had learned from survival in the desert, from facing danger alone, and from trusting her instincts. Jake, in turn, shared stories of his life as a cowboy, the challenges he had faced, and the quiet moments that had filled his years of solitude. They began to trust each other fully, knowing that their bond had been forged in the fires of shared danger and mutual respect. One morning while Jake was tending the cattle, he noticed a group of townspeople approaching from the distant road. Among them were settlers who had heard of the recent events at the ranch and came to offer their thanks and support. They had seen the courage of Jake, Lila, and Ranger, and their admiration was clear in their faces and gestures. The people brought small gifts, supplies, food, and handmade tools to help rebuild what had been lost. Jake felt a warm pride, realizing that their efforts had not only protected the ranch, but had also inspired others in the community. Lila, too, felt a sense of connection to the wider world. For months, she had wandered alone, trusting only her knowledge of the land and her instincts. Now, she saw that courage, loyalty, and cooperation could create bonds stronger than fear and loneliness. She smiled as children ran toward Ranger, laughing and playing, and she felt a quiet hope for a life that could once again be filled with companionship, trust, and shared purpose. Despite the relative peace, Jake and Lila knew that vigilance was necessary. The Wild West was unpredictable, and danger could return at any time. They used this understanding to teach the townspeople simple defensive measures, strategies for tracking, and ways to prepare for potential threats. Ranger became a beloved figure in the community, admired for his intelligence, loyalty, and bravery. He guided children safely, helped herd cattle, and even led townspeople to sources of water or supplies in the harsh desert. His presence was a reminder that courage and loyalty could come in many forms, and that heroes were not always human. As the weeks passed, Jake began to feel a shift within himself. The weight of loneliness that had pressed on him for years was lifting. Lila's presence brought warmth and companionship, and Ranger's constant loyalty reminded him that he was never truly alone. He discovered that courage was not only measured in battles fought with weapons, but also in the willingness to trust, to connect, and to care for others. Lila's resilience and wisdom had taught him that the desert, while harsh and unforgiving, could also nurture growth, connection, and hope. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of red and gold, Jake, Lila, and Ranger sat on a ridge overlooking the ranch. The desert stretched endlessly before them, rugged and beautiful, filled with both danger and opportunity. They watched the sky change colors, the wind rustling through the sagebrush, and felt the quiet satisfaction of having survived, protected, and grown stronger. Ranger lay at their feet, tired but content, his tail wagging softly. Jake reached down and stroked his loyal companion, feeling the deep bond they shared. Lila spoke softly, breaking the peaceful silence. "We've done well," she said. "The ranch is safe, the people are helped, and the land will heal." Jake nodded. "Yes," he replied. "And we've found something more than that. We've found trust, courage, and friendship. And maybe even a new kind of family." Ranger barked once, as if in agreement, and the three of them smiled, understanding the truth of their words. In the weeks that followed, Jake and Lila continued to strengthen their lives on the ranch. They rebuilt what had been damaged, nurtured the cattle and crops, and taught each other skills and knowledge. Lila's experience with the desert taught Jake new ways to read the land, find water, and move silently through the hills. Jake's experience with the cattle and ranching taught Lila the skills needed to maintain and protect the property efficiently. Together, they became a team, their bond strengthened by shared labor, courage, and mutual respect. Ranger remained the ever-watchful guardian, loyal and brave, a constant reminder of the importance of companionship and love. The story of their courage and teamwork spread through the nearby town and settlements. People spoke of the cowboy, the Apache widow, and the loyal dog who had defended the ranch from ruthless outlaws. Their actions inspired others to stand against injustice, to help those in need, and to trust in courage, loyalty, and resilience. Jake and Lila realized that their lives were not only theirs, but also a part of something larger, a community built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. One evening, as they sat by the fire in the cabin, Lila looked at Jake and said, "I never thought I would find safety, friendship, or even hope again. But here, with you and Ranger, I have found all three." Jake smiled, feeling the same warmth in his heart. "I thought I would be alone forever," he replied. "But now I know that even in the harshest desert, loyalty, courage, and trust can bring people together." Ranger wagged his tail, nudging them both, as if to say that he had been part of it all, guiding them to safety, friendship, and hope. As the months passed, life on the ranch settled into a steady rhythm. The desert remained as challenging as ever, but Jake, Lila, and Ranger faced it together. They worked the land, protected the ranch, and helped their neighbors whenever possible. The bond they had formed through danger and survival became unbreakable. They celebrated small victories, shared quiet evenings under the stars, and found joy in simple moments. Their hearts, once burdened with loss and fear, were now filled with hope, trust, and companionship. And so, as the sun set one evening, painting the sky in brilliant oranges, purples, and golds, Jake, Lila, and Ranger stood together at the edge of the ranch. The wind whispered through the desert, carrying with it the scent of sage, dust, and the promise of new beginnings. They had faced danger, survived against odds, and built a life filled with courage, friendship, and loyalty. The desert, vast and wild as it was, had become a place of safety, growth, and new beginnings. Jake looked at Lila and Ranger, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and hope. "We've done well," he said quietly. Lila smiled, her eyes reflecting the glow of the sunset. Yes, she replied, and this is just the beginning. Ranger barked softly, wagging his tail as if to agree. Together, they had faced the wild, overcome danger, and discovered that courage, loyalty, and love could flourish even in the most unforgiving land. In the end, the lonely cowboy was no longer alone. He had found friendship, purpose, and a new family in Lila and Ranger. The desert had tested them, but it had also brought them together. And as the stars appeared one by one in the vast sky above, the trio stood together, ready for whatever adventures the future might hold, knowing that with courage, loyalty, and each other, they could face anything.